Hi, I'm Sterling Edwards. Thank you for joining me. This is going to be a short take on the advantages of using stiff bristle brushes with watercolor. Now, if you're like most of us, you learn how to paint watercolors using very soft brushes like squirrel hair, sable, things like that. But it's amazing how many artists don't realize that you can also use stiff bristle brushes to get some incredible effects with watercolor. Everything from blending and softening edges, applying color, creating textures, creating unique shapes. So I'm going to spend a few minutes showing you just some of the things you can do with a stiff bristle brush. Now, this is not to say that you should not also use your soft brushes, because I use mine as well. But I have found over the years that my stiff bristle brushes are so great for different things because, first of all, they hold a lot of water and they hold a lot of pigment. So if you're working especially on wet paper, you have a lot of saturated color in the brush, so there's fewer trips to the palette. And then you can also kind of double up on the amount of pigment, and by getting the water out of the brush and get some incredible textures and suggested effects using the stiff bristle brushes with drier paint. It's a lot of fun. So spend a few minutes with me and watch this. It might give you some ideas, and we'll take it from there. Okay, for this short take, I have a piece of Fabriano 300-pound cold pressed paper, just taped down to a gator board just for support. And I've got some bristle brushes. Now, these are bristle brushes I personally designed. These are the Sterling Edwards Big Brush blending and glazing brushes. They're a very stiff hog bristle brush, much stiffer than your average watercolor brush. But let's say, for example, you don't have these or you don't want to get these. You can also use other things like this. This is a nylon oil painting brush. It just has a nice spring to it, nice and flat. It's also very stiff. This is a huge oil painting brush. And again, it's a synthetic fiber, but it's very stiff. And then I have a few that are different sizes. The advantages of using bristle brushes there are several advantages actually. First of all, they hold a lot of water. When I designed these specifically to saturate a lot of water and also a lot of color, because the bristles are stiffer, they grab more when you go into your palette, and they hold on to it. The same thing with these. So what I'm going to do quickly is I'm going to wet this piece of paper in a few areas and just kind of show you what you can do with bristle brushes. So let's get some water on this paper. I'm going to use a spray bottle to wet it with. And I'm going to take this is my large 2-inch stiff bristle brush, and I'm using this really just to kind of spread that water around a little bit. Make sure make sure the surface is nicely covered, which it is now. And then we're going to take this big stiff bristle brush, the same one I have that I use to wet the paper. We're going to mix up some color. Now, just to make sure it's very visible on the screen, I'm going to mix up some Payne's Gray. Now, if you look at my palette, you notice that's a very fluid paint. Now, when I'm doing a wet on wet wash, I want paint that is so fluid it does not leave a finger track if you run your finger through it. This is what they commonly refer to as wet paint. This brush holds a lot of water and a lot of pigment, and watch how quickly I can lay in a sky or anything else I want on this wet piece of paper. Let's just say I'm doing a sky right here. It's a graded wash on wet paper. The brush still has paint in it. Now that was using very wet paint on very wet paper. Now let's get the brush clean. And I'm using this is a tissue blotter. This is toilet tissue with paper towel wrapped around it. I'm using this to get all the excess water out of my brush. Now I can come into other colors. For example, here's some umber. And I'm using that same stiff bristle brush. But if you look at this paint, it leaves a track. That's very thick paint. It's not like out of the tube thick, but it's thick enough that it does leave a very definite impression when you run your finger through it, as compared to that which didn't. So again, I'm using the same brush, less water in my brush, less water in the paint. Now I can come in if I want to and start getting all kinds of suggestions of trees, pine trees, evergreens, you name it. I can add more color to it if I choose to. Let's take some of that Payne's Gray and mix with this Hooker's Green and Umber that I'm using. Now get even stronger colors. So you still get that nice, pretty soft edge that is typical with working wet on wet. But look how those shapes are maintaining these applications of paint are maintaining their shapes, maintaining that nice, darker mid-tone value. The sky is drying back nicely. Now let's take a different brush. Let's take this big oil painting brush. The same thing. I can get it nice and wet, and I can dip that in a paint. And again, make sure that paint is relatively dry. This is what they call dry paint. Dry paint is paint that is so dry you can run your finger through it, and it leaves a definite track. We can take this same brush and do all kinds of things like this. If we want to paint like a bunch of deciduous trees, because again, this is a stiff bristle brush. It holds a lot of pigment, and it holds a lot of water. Now, if I want to add to that, I can grab some more color while that's still wet. So I can come in and put some of this yellow into it. Whatever I decide to do. And now, when I learned how to paint with soft brushes, I couldn't get that same look. It just it didn't work. Everything I did was very wet and washy, and the paint kind of went wherever it wanted to go. I didn't have very much control over it. But now, using these stiffer brushes, like this, I can get some beautiful effects. Now down here, the paper's dry. It's relatively dry now, so let's see if we can't do something with these brushes down in this area. So I can come down this area and get some beautiful dry brush by dragging the brush. Even using this squared off brush that I designed. And again, I'm getting all the excess water out of it. I can come in and get beautiful grassy effects like this. And it's very hard to get that look with soft brushes. I've tried just about every soft brush there is, and I cannot get that same look that I get with these stiff bristle brushes. So quite often what I'll do in a painting is I'll start wet on wet, lay in my wet shapes like this, lay in my various textures that suggest there's grass and trees and what have you. And then I'll come back on dry paper and put in some darker values and some detail, whatever I need to do to dress up my painting. But it's not unusual for me to start a piece working primarily on wet paper using bristle brushes. So just give it some thought. If you have a chance, next time you buy art supplies, buy some stiff bristle brushes, some oil painting brushes. They don't have to be expensive. They can be relatively inexpensive nylon brushes, kind of like this. But just give them a try. You'd be surprised what you can do. Look how rich those colors are. So you get this nice graded wash using a bristle brush and wet paint. Then you have these nice, very definite shapes that are darker in value, a little bit more organized, using a drier paint and a stiff bristle brush. But when this dries, you still got that nice, beautiful softness. You got that beautiful soft edge, which is so beautiful in watercolor. And then you can come in on dry paper if you want to and add a few hard edges just for balance. Anyway, that's just a short take, just to give you some ideas on different things you can do with watercolor. And the sky's the limit. I say go for it. But give this a try. It really works. Thank you for joining me. If you get a chance, go to sterlingedwards.com. And while you're there, be sure to look at our live Zoom class schedule. We're doing live Zoom classes out of my studio, a variety of subjects. And we're also doing some in-house workshops now that we're getting back on the road a little bit following this the extreme COVID outbreak. We're getting back on the road now this year in 2022. And we're doing some more in-house workshops. So if you get a chance, go to sterlingedwards.com, check out my workshop schedule and my live Zoom class schedule. We'll see you next time. Thank you.